Think about the very last time you totally bombed a presentation at work. Or, maybe you completely failed a test you had spent literally weeks studying for. What was the exact first sentence that flashed through your mind in that split second of realization?
Oh, man. If you are like most people, it was probably something absolutely brutal.
Right. Something so cutting and definitive that you would never, ever say it out loud to another human being.
Yeah, and yet we just accept that internal brutality as objective truth when it is directed at ourselves. I mean, we treat that internal voice as if it is a flawless, impartial reporter delivering the evening news.
When, in reality, it is a highly biased commentator operating on totally faulty data.
Exactly.
Which is exactly why we are tackling this today. Whenever we get ready for a major life transition, there is this almost obsessive focus on the physical preparation.
Oh, for sure. Like you're packing for your first year at an intense boarding school, or maybe you're moving across the country for a high-stakes corporate job.
Yeah, you make the spreadsheets, you buy the exact right supplies, you fold the clothes perfectly, you pack the physical bags with absolute precision to give yourself this, well, this illusion of control.
But in all that frantic packing, we completely forget to install the right mental software for the journey.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring the hidden architecture of building true resilience, managing your inner voice, and mastering your own thinking patterns.
And our mission today is to figure out exactly how we can shift our mindset to fundamentally transform how we experience challenges.
Right, making sure you, the listener, walk away with actionable mental tools to handle whatever high-pressure environment you find yourself in. We're pulling today's insights from notes titled, What a Boarder Can Learn from Karen Reivich.
And Reivich is a leading expert in resilience and co-author of The Resilience Factor. What is so crucial to understand right from the jump here is how terribly our culture usually defines resilience.
Oh, totally. We tend to think of it as just, gritting your teeth, burying your feelings, and enduring a really tough situation without breaking.
Yeah, we view it as a passive shield. You just stand there and take the hits like a brick wall. But Reivich's work flips that entirely on its head.
Because surviving and thriving isn't just about what happens around you. It is about what happens inside your mind.
Exactly. Resilience isn't a passive shield against the external environment. It is a highly active internal cognitive process. It's something you do, not something you just have.
It is a deliberate practice. And to engage in that practice, we have to start at the absolute baseline, the constant, never-ending chatter happening in our own heads.
Because if we want to change our outcomes, we have to identify the mechanism that creates those outcomes. Reivich outlines an incredibly powerful sequence that dictates human behavior.
Right. It's that your thoughts shape your response.
Yeah.
And then your response shapes your outcome.
It is a direct chain reaction. And the trigger for that entire chain is the inner voice. We don't really need to over-explain what an internal monologue is. I mean, everyone knows that voice.
Oh, yeah. But what is fascinating in Reivich's framework is when that voice decides to take the microphone.
Yes. It doesn't just narrate your life equally. It pipes up loudest and most aggressively in 3 specific windows. When something goes incredibly well, when something goes horribly wrong, or when we are staring down a brand new intimidating challenge.
And the brain is, at its core, this ultimate efficiency machine. It wants to conserve energy.
So when you face a new challenge, the brain doesn't want to compute a brand new nuanced assessment of your abilities. Instead, it reaches into its files and pulls out a pre-recorded script.
Right, and the unhelpful inner voice is just a bad script playing on loop. Like if you were in that boarding school environment and you get handed a difficult assignment, the unhelpful voice instantly fires off.
I'm not good at this. Or everyone in this room is smarter than me. Or the ultimate conversation ender, I will never improve.
But the resilient inner voice in that exact same situation sounds completely different. It says, I can get better at this, or this is just a chance to learn the material, or simply, I'll try again tomorrow.
And notice the raw facts of the situation haven't changed a single degree. The external pressure of the assignment is identical.
The only difference is the specific cognitive frame you were using to explain the event to yourself.
Which brings us to a fundamental realization that is often very difficult for high achievers to accept. Not every thought you have is true.
Wow, yeah.
In fact, under stress, a large percentage of your thoughts are highly distorted. Thoughts are just thinking patterns. They are electrical impulses.
Yeah.
They are not concrete facts.
I have to admit, conceptually I get that. But in the real world, the negative inner voice feels like it has absolute authority.
It really does.
It's like having a terrible sports commentator living inside your brain who completely ignores all your winning plays and only ever highlights your fumbles on repeat in high definition.
That is a perfect way to put it. And that commentator sounds so convincing.
But wait, if a thought feels incredibly real in the moment, like that heavy, sinking, visceral feeling of, I always fail,
Yeah.
how do you actually prove to yourself that it is just a faulty pattern and not a concrete fact?
What's fascinating here is the actual mechanics of how we force the brain to abandon that default script. You can't just tell the sports commentator to shut up.
Right, they won't listen.
Exactly. You have to prove them wrong on their own terms. Reivich's work is all about shifting from a fixed mindset to a flexible one. And notice the goal isn't a purely positive or delusional mindset where everything is sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah, the goal's a balanced mindset.
Right. And to achieve that, you have to subject your own thoughts to a rigorous cross-examination. You intercept the thought and force it through 3 very specific tactical filters. First, you ask yourself, is this really true?
So you are basically putting your own panic on the witness stand and demanding to see the evidence.
Yes.
If the thought is, I am going to fail out of this school, you have to pause and ask, wait, is there actual empirical evidence that I am failing out, or did I just get a C on one quiz?
Exactly. You force the brain to look at the data instead of the emotion, but the brain is stubborn, which is why the second question is necessary. Is there another way to look at this?
Ah, okay. That forces your cognition out of its fixed tunnel vision.
You're demanding that your brain generate alternative hypotheses. Maybe you aren't failing out. Maybe the material was just introduced poorly, or maybe you need a different study method.
But I'll be honest, when I am in the middle of a downward spiral, asking, is this true? Or, is there another way? Feels like trying to do algebra while falling out of an airplane. The panic makes the negative thought feel absolute.
It really does, which is why I think the third question Reivich suggests is the absolute masterstroke. What would I say to a friend in this situation?
That question completely bypasses the ego's defense mechanisms.
It does, because let's think about the psychology of this double standard. If my best friend bombed a presentation, I would never look at them and say, well, you always fail, you are fundamentally incompetent, and your career is over.
No. I would be an absolute monster of a friend if I said that.
Right. I would immediately contextualize it for them. I would say, hey, the projector broke, you were rushed, it was one bad meeting, you'll crush the next one.
So I have all this immense empathy, logic, and perspective ready to go.
Yeah.
But when it's me, I deny myself access to those exact same tools. Why are we wired to be so ruthlessly cruel to ourselves?
It really comes down to distance and ego threat. When it is your friend, your core identity isn't under attack. You can view their situation objectively.
Ah, all right.
But when it is you, your brain perceives the failure as an existential threat to your status, your security, or your future. So the alarm bells ring at maximum volume.
So by asking, what would I say to a friend? You're essentially tricking your brain into creating artificial psychological distance.
Exactly. You are stepping outside of the ego threat. You instantly access a reserve of compassion and objective logic that you already possess. You prove the negative thought is just a pattern by recognizing that you would never apply that same brutal pattern to someone you care about.
Knowing that our thoughts aren't facts is a great theoretical baseline. But, it is totally useless if we don't realize when we are actually having those distorted thoughts. We need to catch the specific vocabulary our brain uses to trick us.
Yes, because Reivich points out a very specific language trap that our inner commentator uses to turn temporary, manageable bumps in the road into permanent, impenetrable mental roadblocks.
Right. It's the always and never trap.
This is a massive cognitive pitfall, and it is incredibly common in high-stress environments. I always mess these projects up. My manager never listens to my ideas. Nothing ever goes right for me here.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Using always and never in response to a setback is like applying a software patch that intentionally bricks your entire computer's operating system just because one single application crashed.
That's a great analogy.
It takes a highly localized, temporary glitch and forces a catastrophic, system-wide shutdown. It is a massive overreaction to a specific data point. But why do our brains default to those two words? Why do we want things to be permanent?
Because the brain craves certainty above almost everything else. Even negative certainty feels safer to the primitive parts of our brain than ambiguity.
Really? Just knowing for sure is better than hoping.
Yeah, if you decide that you always fail, then you don't have to deal with the vulnerability of hoping for a better outcome next time. Permanence is the absolute enemy of resilience. Because if a problem is permanent, why would you ever bother trying to fix it?
Oh, wow. If you always mess up, effort is completely useless. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy that protects you from the pain of trying and failing again.
But the reality is the exact opposite. Most problems are temporary. And most setbacks are highly specific. They are not universal laws of physics governing your existence. They are isolated incidents.
If we look at the boarding school examples, they make this mechanism so clear. One bad test grade does not define your overall intellectual ability. One social mistake in the dining hall does not permanently define your character.
And one deeply difficult homesick day does not define your entire experience at the school. Problems must be quarantined to keep them in perspective.
And quarantining a problem requires actively separating two things that our brains naturally want to superglue together.
Yeah.
We have to separate the event from the meaning.
Yes. Reivich breaks this down into a profound but simple formula. Something happens, and then we interpret it. Those are two entirely distinct steps, even though our brains execute them a microsecond apart.
Let's build an example of how that gap actually plays out in real time, because this is where the theory hits the pavement. Let's say I am a professional at a corporate job, and I submit a proposal that my boss immediately rejects and sends back with red ink all over it. The event, the raw, undeniable video camera fact of the situation, is just the proposal was returned for revisions. That is it. That is the only thing that actually happened in physical reality.
But the interpretation, the meaning your brain instantly assigns to that event before you've even walked back to your desk is, I am not competent enough for this role, and I'm probably going to be fired.
Notice how quickly the brain closes the gap between a piece of neutral data and a catastrophic verdict on your identity. We take external feedback and weaponize it against our own self-worth.
Reivich teaches that learning to manually force a wedge between what actually happened and what you think it means is the skeleton key to escaping the anxiety spiral.
Because once you separate them, you can finally focus on action. You shift your internal script from, I failed, so I am capable, to, my boss didn't like this specific angle. What data do I need to improve the next draft?
It turns a dead end into a detour. You are extracting the lesson and leaving the self-flagellation behind.
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
Oh, definitely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this separation is what naturally leads to the next core concept of resilience. Focusing relentlessly on what you can actually control.
Right.
In any complex environment, there are massive variables that are entirely outside your grasp. You cannot control your boss's mood. You cannot control the fluctuating economy. You cannot control unexpected rule changes at your school.
And you cannot directly control final outcomes.
Exactly. But you can control your effort, the thoroughness of your preparation, and the quality of your response. Resilient people focus their finite cognitive energy exclusively where it makes a material difference. They control the controllables.
It is the very foundation of personal agency.
Mm-hmm.
But, I hear that, and the logic is flawless.
Yeah.
But I have to push back a bit on behalf of the listener.
Sure.
Because this can sound a bit like toxic positivity if we aren't careful.
Yeah.
It is really easy for us to sit here in a studio and say, just control your response.
Right.
But imagine you are actually in a highly regulated environment, like a strict boarding school or a rigid corporate hierarchy. Your daily schedule is dictated to you down to the minute. The rules are made by an invisible administration. The tests and metrics for success are designed by someone else.
Yeah. So much is external.
So much of your existence is entirely out of your hands. In an environment like that, isn't it just profoundly exhausting to try and constantly police your own internal thoughts on top of obeying all those external rules? Doesn't controlling the controllables just become another tiring chore on an already massive to-do list?
That is a very fair critique, and it is the exact friction most people hit when they try to implement cognitive behavioral techniques.
Yeah.
It absolutely sounds like a heavy cognitive load to constantly interrogate your own mind.
Yeah.
But let's look at the alternative. Letting an unmanaged, deeply negative inner voice dictate your reality is actually exponentially more exhausting in the long run.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Living with chronic, unchecked anxiety, catastrophizing every minor mistake, and constantly defending your ego against imaginary threats burns massive amounts of cognitive fuel. It is an allostatic load that eventually crushes you. The effort it takes to reframe a thought is a short-term investment that prevents a long-term psychological drain.
So it's the difference between the effort of putting out a small kitchen fire versus the exhaustion of letting the whole house burn down and having to rebuild it from scratch.
Precisely. And this is where Reivich's framework provides a really comforting pivot. It tells us that managing our thoughts isn't about executing massive, tiring, overnight overhauls of our personality. It is simply about treating mental resilience exactly like our daily physical routines.
Building mental habits. Think about how much time a boarding school or an athletic program spends on physical routines. You have scheduled study prep time, you have mandatory sports, you have strict lights-out sleep schedules.
It is all highly regimented to groove good physical and academic habits into your nervous system.
But we rarely apply that same systematic approach to our mental habits.
This raises an important question for you, the listener. What do your own daily mental routines look like compared to your physical ones?
Yeah, you brush your teeth every single morning without debating whether you feel like it. It is just an automatic hygiene habit.
But do you have an automatic habit for how you respond to professional setbacks? Do you have a routine for how you talk to yourself after a rejection? Resilience, again, isn't about possessing some magical trait of strength. It is about consistently thinking in a way that supports your goals rather than sabotaging them.
And what takes the pressure off is that you do not need to change overnight. You don't have to wake up tomorrow as an impenetrable fortress of Zen. It is all about microscopic shifts.
Catching just one negative thought today and asking if it's true.
Reframing just one stressful situation at work. Catching yourself using the word always and swapping it out just once.
Because over time, those microscopic shifts compound. The formula we are left with is beautiful in its simplicity. Change your thinking, and you change your experience.
When you catch that one thought, you slowly build a tiny bit of confidence.
That confidence lowers your baseline anxiety. And as your anxiety drops, your overall resilience strengthens. You are literally rewiring the neural pathways in your brain to default to a balanced assessment rather than a catastrophic one.
And the cascading effects of this are incredible. When an entire community starts adopting these habits, like an entire dorm at a boarding school or a whole department in a company, the culture fundamentally transforms.
When these specific cognitive skills become the norm, people handle setbacks with grace. Paralyzing anxiety visibly reduces. People become far more independent because they aren't terrified of making a single mistake.
It creates an environment where challenges are viewed as entirely manageable puzzles, where asking for support is seen as a strategic tool rather than a weakness, and where growth is continuous.
It stops being a place where difficulties act as dead ends and becomes a place where you actively learn how to navigate them.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring all these threads together. Whether you are a student navigating the intense halls of a boarding school, a professional managing a high-stakes career, or just someone trying to navigate the everyday hurdles of human existence, you are going to face friction.
The physical bags you packed for the journey, your degrees, your resume, your tangible supplies, can only get you to the starting line.
True resilience isn't about avoiding the events that happen to you. It is about the mechanics of how you think, how you separate fact from emotional fiction, and how you choose to move forward. Applying Karen Reivich's framework gives you the power to actually build the mindset required to handle those challenges.
It means paying close attention to that commentator in your head. It means having the courage to put your own thoughts on the witness stand, refusing to let words like always and never dictate your potential, and radically focusing your energy only on the variables you can actually control.
It is about actively installing that essential mental software so that when the hard moments inevitably arrive, you aren't just externally prepared, you are internally fortified.
And we want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We have spent this entire deep dive looking inward, examining the mechanics of our own inner voice and the double standard of how we talk to ourselves.
Yeah.
But consider this. If making small shifts in our internal dialogue can completely transform our own personal experience of a setback, how might changing our external dialogue actually rewrite the resilience culture of our entire community?
Oh, wow.
If we consciously start speaking to our friends, our colleagues, and our peers differently about their failures, if we actively help them separate the event from their worth and gently challenge their own always and never traps, how much stronger and how much more resilient could the people around us become?